Welcome to the quietest corner of the village. We knew you'd find us eventually.
Chapter 1. A crown of thorns and giant cabbages. Agatha Raisin stood in the damp, unforgiving grass of the Carsley village green, severely regretting her choice of Italian leather ankle boots. It was the annual Carsley Harvest Festival, an event that usually involved an excess of oversized vegetables, lukewarm cider, and the kind of forced rural cheerfulness that made Agatha long for a gin and tonic in a dimly lit London bar. But this year, the parish council had decided to introduce a new tradition, the crowning of the Harvest Queen. Agatha had initially assumed, with her usual blend of vanity and competitive spirit, that she might be asked to take on the role. After all, she was one of the village's most prominent residents, and she had just returned from a trip to London with a spectacular new fuchsia wool coat that demanded a public audience. Instead, the title had gone to Fiona Sterling. Fiona was 35, effortlessly thin, and possessed a cascade of golden blonde hair that Agatha was absolutely certain came from a bottle, even if the roots were maddeningly well maintained. She had moved to the Cotswolds only 6 months ago after a very amicable, terribly boring divorce, and had immediately set about charming every man with a pulse in a 5-mile radius. "I just don't see the point of it," Agatha muttered, glaring across the bunting, draped green. "Harvest Queen. It sounds like something out of a pagan sacrifice, and look at her. She's wearing linen in October. It's practically pneumonia-inducing." Mrs. Bloxby, the vicar's wife and Agatha's dearest friend, offered a gentle, soothing smile. She looked entirely at home in her sensible tweeds. "Now, Agatha, the parish council thought it would be a lovely way to boost morale, and Fiona has put a great deal of effort into organizing the charity raffle. Fiona has put a great deal of effort into batting her eyelashes at the new architect," Agatha retorted, her sharp eyes tracking the blonde woman as she laughed far too loudly at something a tall, devastatingly handsome man in a barber jacket had just said. Julian Vance had recently arrived in Carsley to renovate the old mill, and Agatha had spent the better part of the morning trying to manufacture a casual conversation with him, only to be entirely outmaneuvered by Fiona. Worse still, earlier that morning, Fiona had paused by Agatha's folding table of contribution cakes, tilted her head and said, "Oh, Agatha, how perfectly brave of you to bring store-bought quiche to a country fete. It's so refreshingly urban." Agatha's cheeks still burned with the humiliation of it. She had transferred the quiche from its Marks and Spencer packaging to a ceramic dish with the utmost care. How had the wretched woman known? "I think I shall go home," Agatha announced suddenly, pulling her future collar tighter around her neck. "My feet are freezing, and if I have to watch Mr. Boggle parade that obscenely shaped marrow around for one more minute, I shall scream." "Oh, do stay just a little longer," Mrs. Bloxby urged kindly. "Alf is just about to do the crowning ceremony in the main marquee. It would look a bit pointed if you left right now." Agatha sighed, her shoulders slumping a fraction. She cared entirely too much about what the village thought of her, a weakness she despised but could never quite shake. "Fine, but I am standing at the back, and I reserve the right to leave the moment the applause dies down." A crackle of feedback echoed across the green as Vicar Bloxby tapped the microphone on the makeshift wooden stage inside the large white marquee. The villagers began to shuffle inside, a sea of wax jackets, floral scarves, and Wellington boots. Agatha dragged her feet, wincing as a patch of mud threatened the suede toe of her right boot. "Ladies and gentlemen, and children, of course," the vicar's voice boomed cheerfully. "Welcome to the culmination of this year's Harvest Festival. It is my great pleasure to summon our very first Harvest Queen to the stage to receive her crown of autumn foliage. Let us welcome the lovely Fiona Sterling." A polite ripple of applause swept through the tent. Heads turned, necks craned, no one appeared. The vicar cleared his throat. "Fiona, if you could step up to the stage, my dear." Agatha crossed her arms, a smug smile tugging at the corners of her lipsticked mouth. Probably having a hair emergency, she thought uncharitably. Or perhaps she's cornered poor Julian Vance behind the tombola. Has anyone seen Fiona? Mrs. Wellington, a formidable woman who ran the Women's Institute with an iron fist, barked from the front row. She said she was going to the produce tent to fetch a ribbon she left behind. Someone volunteered from the middle of the crowd. The produce tent was a smaller, gloomier structure, set slightly apart from the main marquee, meant to keep the prize-winning vegetables cool before the final judging. Agatha, who was standing nearest the exit and was frankly desperate for an excuse to get out of the stuffy, damp, smelling crowd, seized the opportunity. "I'll go and fetch her," she announced loudly, relishing the chance to interrupt Fiona's dramatic entrance and hurry the tedious proceedings along. "She's probably tripped over her own ego." "Thank you, Agatha," the vicar said, looking relieved. Agatha marched out of the marquee, the cool autumn air a welcome relief against her flushed cheeks. She crossed the 20 yards to the produce tent, muttering under her breath about vanity and thoughtless behavior. She pushed aside the heavy canvas flap and stepped into the dim interior. The air inside smelled strongly of damp earth, bruised apples, and sharp onions. Rows of trestle tables were lined with monstrous cabbages, perfectly spherical onions, and towering displays of squash. "Fiona," Agatha called out, her tone dripping with impatience. "Fiona, come along. The vicar is waiting to put some weeds on your head, and everyone wants to go home." There was no answer. Agatha frowned, venturing further down the central aisle. The lighting was poor, just a few bulb strings swaying gently in the breeze that leaked through the canvas seams. "Really, Fiona, this isn't funny. If you're busy making eyes at the architect among the root vegetables." Agatha stopped, at the very back of the tent, right beside Mr. Boggle's prize-winning display of autumn squashes. A splash of pale linen lay crumpled on the ground. Annoyance flared hot in Agatha's chest. Had the silly woman fainted? She hurried forward, her sharp words already forming on her tongue. "For heaven's sake, Fiona, get up. You'll ruin your hip." The words died in Agatha's throat. Fiona Sterling was lying on her back, staring blindly up at the canvas roof. Her perfect bottle blonde hair was spread across a bed of hay, and her flawless complexion was mottled with an ugly, terrifying shade of purple. But it was what was around her neck that made Agatha's breath catch in a sharp, horrified gasp. A beautifully woven sheaf of decorative harvest wheat, the very one meant to be presented to the Queen, was twisted violently tight around Fiona's throat, the stiff stalks digging viciously into her pale skin. Agatha stared, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. All her previous irritation vanished, replaced by an icy jolt of adrenaline that was entirely familiar, yet completely unwelcome. She backed away, one slow step at a time, until she bumped into a table of prize turnips. Murder, here, in the middle of the village fete. Agatha squeezed her eyes shut for a brief second. Why, she thought with a sudden, overwhelming wave of exhaustion, mixed with an undeniable, inappropriate spark of thrill. Why does this always happen to me? She turned on her heel and practically sprinted back toward the main marquee, her expensive Italian boots entirely forgotten in the mud. The Harvest Queen was dead, and whether she wanted to admit it or not, Agatha Raisin was already on the case. Chapter 2. Panic, police, and a suspiciously perfect alibi. Agatha burst through the canvas flaps of the main marquee, like a fuchsia-clad cannonball, skidding slightly on the damp grass. The vicar was still at the microphone, tapping it with a mild expression of bemusement, while the villagers murmured in restless anticipation. "She's dead," Agatha bellowed, completely abandoning any pretense of Cotswold tact. "Strangled with a bunch of wheat. Someone call the police." For a moment there was absolute stunned silence. A pin could have dropped and echoed like a cymbal. Then Mrs. Wellington emitted a high-pitched sound reminiscent of a deflating tire and collapsed backward into the arms of the startled postman. Pandemonium erupted. "Murder," someone shrieked. "I knew it. I knew no good would come of a pagan fertility ritual." Old Miss Simpkins cried out, crossing herself fervently, despite being staunchly Church of England. Agatha stood near the entrance, her chest heaving, watching the chaos unfold with a strange sense of detachment. She smoothed her wool coat, suddenly fiercely aware that her pulse was racing, not just with shock, but with an electric, undeniable thrill. She immediately felt a pang of guilt about it. A woman was dead, for heaven's sake. A terribly irritating, overly tanned woman with viciously sharp elbows in social situations. But a woman, Nonetheless, within 20 minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet country air. 2 squad cars skidded onto the village green, tearing up the muddy grass, followed shortly by the unmarked car of Detective Inspector Wilkes and Detective Sergeant Bill Wong. Agatha felt a genuine rush of fondness at the sight of Bill, with his round, friendly face and perpetually patient demeanor. Wilkes, however, was another matter entirely. The inspector looked like a man who had been suffering from chronic indigestion for a decade, and the sight of Agatha Raisin only ever seemed to worsen his symptoms. Mrs. Raisin, Wilkes sighed heavily as he approached the entrance to the produce tent, where Agatha had planted herself with the authority of a Buckingham Palace guard. Why am I not surprised to find you hovering over a corpse like a vulture in a brightly coloured coat? I was the one who found her, Inspector, Agatha snapped, her back stiffening in immediate defence. I went to fetch her for the ceremony, and a good thing I did too before someone trampled all over the evidence, trying to get a better look at a prize-winning leak. Thank you, Agatha, Bill interjected smoothly, giving her a sympathetic look. Did you see anyone coming or going from the tent? No, Agatha admitted, annoyed that she hadn't been more observant. But it was dark, and everyone was in the main marquee. Well, supposedly everyone, as Wilkes pushed past her into the tent, muttering under his breath about interfering amateurs. Agatha drifted back toward the milling crowd of villagers. They had been corralled behind a hastily erected line of police tape. But rather than looking traumatized, most of them looked positively invigorated by the drama. The village buzz had begun, and Agatha, with her power-owned instincts, knew exactly how to listen. She sidled up to a cluster of women near the tea urn, pretending to inspect a chipped saucer. I'm just saying, whispered Brenda, the local busybody who ran the post office. She had it coming. Did you see the way she was draped all over Julian Vance yesterday at the pub, and him practically engaged to the Harrison girl? Oh, I wouldn't call them engaged, countered Mrs. Hodges, clutching her handbag tightly to her chest. But Fiona certainly had no shame. Borrowing money too, I heard. Asked the butcher to put a very expensive cut of beef on a tab she didn't intend to pay. Said her settlement check was late. Agatha's ears pricked up. Borrowing money. Fiona had given off the air of a woman dripping in alimony. Why on earth would she be begging credit from the local butcher? She glanced across the green and spotted Julian Vance. The handsome architect was standing near the edge of the police tape, talking to a uniformed constable. For a man whose supposed flirtation had just been brutally murdered, he looked remarkably composed. He was nodding solemnly, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his Barber jacket. There was no shock in his posture, no tremor in his hands. It was, Agatha decided instantly, a little too perfect. A truly innocent man who had just been flirting with the deceased ought to look at least mildly rattled. Tragic, isn't it? A voice said smoothly beside her. Agatha jumped. It was Charles Fraith, her aristocratic, notoriously frugal, and occasionally charming friend, who had materialized out of nowhere, looking effortlessly rumpled in a tweed jacket, with patched elbows. Charles, what are you doing here? Heard the sirens. Hope there might be leftover cake, he said, offering a lazy smile. Seems the Harvest Queen has been dethroned, rather permanently. Do you know who did it yet, Aggie? Don't call me Aggie, she bristled automatically. And no, I don't. The police are handling it. I have absolutely no intention of getting involved this time. It's unseemly. People will think I actively seek out dead bodies. Charles let out a short, cynical laugh. Darling, the whole village already thinks you sleep with a magnifying glass under your pillow. You might as well own it. Agatha glared at him, but her eyes inadvertently darted back to Julian Vance, who was now speaking quietly to a visibly pale young woman, the Harrison girl, presumably. The girl looked terrified. Julian looked completely in control, offering her a practiced, comforting smile. Agatha crossed her arms, her pride still stinging from Fiona's earlier quiche insult, mingling now with her innate, burning curiosity. She told herself she was just going to observe, just ask a few casual questions to clear the air. She absolutely was not going to investigate. But as she watched the suspicious lack of genuine grief among her neighbours, Agatha Raisin knew she was already lying to herself. Chapter 3. Polite Inquiries and Impertinent Suspicions by 3 o'clock. The Carsley village green had been thoroughly taped off, measured, and photographed by the grim-faced forensics team. Deprived of their main source of weekend entertainment, the villagers naturally migrated to the only logical sanctuary, the Red Lion. The pub was heaving, smelling of stale beer, damp wool, and the distinct electric musk of shared scandal. Agatha, having been dragged along by a thirsty Charles Fraith, squeezed her way to a corner table, her future coat acting as a highly visible warning beacon. "Pint of the usual for me, and a large gin and tonic for the lady," Charles told the landlord, tossing a crumpled £10 note onto the sticky mahogany bar. "Actually, make it a double. She's had a shock, found a corpse, practically tripped over it." "I did not trip," Agatha hissed, snatching her glass as soon as it was poured. She took a fortifying gulp, the ice clinking loudly against the rim. "And keep your voice down, Charles. I am trying to maintain a low profile." Charles snorted into his beer. "You? A low profile, Agatha? My sweet, you're wearing a coat the color of radioactive bubblegum and glaring at everyone like they owe you rent. You couldn't be subtle if your life depended on it." Agatha ignored him, her sharp gaze sweeping the crowded room. She spotted them almost immediately. Tucked into a booth by the roaring fireplace were Julian Vance and the Harrison girl, Emily, Agatha recalled. Emily looked wretched, her pale face completely devoid of makeup, her mousy brown hair escaping from a haphazard claw clip. Julian, on the other hand, was leaning in close, his hand resting reassuringly over hers, comforting her or making sure she keeps her mouth shut. Agatha wondered, her par-trained brain automatically spinning the optics. "I'm just going to say hello, Agatha," announced, abandoning Charles and marching across the pub. She descended upon their booth with the stealth of a tank. "Julian, Emily, terrible business, isn't it? Quite ruins the autumn spirit." Julian looked up, his handsome face tightening for a fraction of a second before smoothing out into a mask of polite solemnity. "Ah, Mrs. Raisin. Yes, an absolute tragedy. I was just telling Emily here that it's hard to believe Fiona is really gone. She was so vibrant." "Vibrant is certainly one word for it," Agatha said, sliding uninvited into the booth opposite them. "I'd have gone with relentless myself. I hear she had a rather nasty habit of borrowing money." Emily gasped, snatching her hand out from under Julian's as if she had been burned. "Mrs. Raisin, that's a terrible thing to say about the dead. The dead don't care about their credit score, Emily, but the living certainly do." Agatha pointed out sensibly. "Did she owe you money, Julian? Is that why you were so firmly attached to her side yesterday evening?" Julian's polite smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. Up close, Agatha noticed the faint lines around his eyes. He wasn't quite as young as he appeared from a distance. "I don't know what you are implying, Mrs. Raisin, but my interactions with Fiona were purely professional. She was interested in the mill's renovation." "Fiona Sterling didn't know a joist from a jalapeno," Agatha scoffed, crossing her arms. "She was interested in you, and judging by the way you were looking at her, you weren't exactly discouraging it. Did it cause a little friction? A lover's tiff, perhaps, Agatha?" The booming, furious voice belonged to Detective Inspector Wilkes. He was standing right behind her, his face a mottled, angry red that clashed horribly with Agatha's coat. "Oh, hello, Inspector," Agatha said, refusing to flinch. "I was just expressing my condolences. You were interrogating witnesses in a crowded pub, which is police business." Wilkes barked, jabbing a thick finger in her direction. "I am warning you, Mrs. Raisin. Keep your nose out of this. You are not a detective. You are a retired public relations executive, with far too much time on her hands and a dangerous lack of boundaries." The pub had gone dead silent. Dozens of eyes were fixed on Agatha. She felt a hot, prickling wave of humiliation wash over her. She hated being scolded publicly. She hated feeling foolish. But more than anything, she hated being told what she couldn't do. Agatha stood up slowly, drawing herself up to her full height. She looked Wilkes dead in the eye, her pride hardening into cold, pure defiance. "I assure you, Inspector," she said, her voice carrying crisp and clear across the silent room, "I have absolutely no interest in doing your job for you. I only hope, for the sake of poor Fiona, that you manage to do it yourself before you arrest the wrong person out of sheer incompetence." She turned on her heel and marched out of the pub, her head held high, acutely aware of the whispers breaking out in her wake. Outside, in the brisk October air, Agatha took a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. Well, that was it, then. She had practically declared war on the local constabulary. There was no backing down now. She was going to find out exactly who strangled Fiona Sterling, and she was going to do it just to see the look on Inspector Wilkes's smug face when she handed him the killer on a silver platter. Chapter 4. The peculiar post and the missing alibi. The chill of the evening air hit Agatha the moment she stepped out of the Red Lion, cooling her flushed cheeks. She stomped down the high street toward her charming, slightly eccentric cottage, her mind a furious tempest of wounded pride, righteous indignation, and raw, gnawing curiosity. Interrogating witnesses, she fumed, unlocking her front door with a vicious twist of her key. I was simply asking the logical questions that a lazy, unimaginative lout like Wilkes is too incompetent to consider. She kicked off her boots, noting with a fresh pang of annoyance that the suede toe of the right one was permanently stained with costly mud, and poured herself a very large gin. Settling into her plush velvet armchair, she stared into the empty fireplace. Fiona Sterling had been strangled with a decorative sheaf of harvest wheat. That detail alone bothered Agatha more than she cared to admit. It wasn't a weapon of opportunity snatched from a kitchen drawer. It was a curated, specific object, pulled right from the festival displays. It required intent, a steady hand, and a shocking lack of squeamishness. Julian Vance had been far too calm, Emily Harrison far too terrified, and the village at large far too eager to sweep Fiona's flaws under the rug. There was a sharp, peremptory knock at her front door. Agatha groaned, dragging herself out of the chair. If it was Wilkes coming to serve her with a formal warning, she was going to bite his thumb off. She yanked the door open, ready for battle. It wasn't Wilkes, it was Bill Wong, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the dim porch light. He held a takeaway coffee cup in one hand and shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Evening, Agatha," Bill said, offering a weak, apologetic smile. "Bill, come to arrest me, or just here to deliver a reprimand on behalf of your perpetually sour boss?" Agatha stepped back, holding the door open. "Neither," Bill said, slipping past her into the hallway. "Well, officially, Wilkes thinks I'm back at the station reviewing the neighborhood logbooks. Unofficially, I thought you might want to know what we've actually found out so far." Agatha's eyes narrowed with sharp interest, though she kept her tone haughty. "Oh, and why would you share official police business with an interfering amateur?" "Because you have a knack for getting people to talk, Agatha, and frankly we're hitting a wall," Bill confessed, following her into the sitting room and sinking gratefully onto the sofa. He accepted the small gesture of hospitality, a dry biscuit Agatha tossed his way, and sighed. The coroner's preliminary report came in. Fiona died between 2:30 and 3 this afternoon. Her neck was broken cleanly, and the wheat stalks were jammed down with enough force to suggest someone with a fair bit of upper body strength, or deep personal fury. Well, that rules out half the village women, though Mrs. Wellington could probably lift a calf if she was angry enough, Agatha mused, leaning against the mantelpiece. What about alibis? Where were our prime suspects? "That's the interesting part," Bill said, leaning forward. "Julian Vance claims he was helping set up the acoustic speakers in the main marquee from 2 until 3. Several people saw him drifting in and out, but there's a 20-minute gap around 2:45 where nobody can explicitly place him. He says he went to his truck to fetch a spare cable." "A spare cable," Agatha repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. How convenient, and the Harrison girl. Emily Harrison was at the refreshment tent, helping pour tea. Her alibi for the whole afternoon is solid, too solid, almost. She was surrounded by people complaining about the lack of biscuits. Bill paused, running a hand through his dark hair. "Then there's the financial angle you hinted at in the pub. Turns out you were right, Agatha. Fiona was broke." Agatha blinked, genuinely surprised. Broke, but she wore designer labels and talked endlessly about her London investments. "All smoke and mirrors," Bill confirmed. "Her ex-husband left her virtually nothing, and her bank accounts are heavily overdrawn. She's been borrowing money from local tradespeople under the guise of an impending property settlement. But according to our preliminary check, there is no property settlement. She was living on borrowed time and borrowed pounds. Agatha absorbed this, her PR mind instantly connecting the dots. Someone in the village had lent her money, perhaps a significant sum, and realized they were never getting it back. Or perhaps Fiona had been using that financial leverage to blackmail someone. Julian Vance, perhaps. An ambitious architect with a new project and a reputation to protect would hate nothing more than a scandal involving a penniless social climber. "Did you find her purse or phone?" Agatha asked quietly. Bill's expression tightened. "That's just it. They weren't on her body and they weren't in the produce tent. Someone took them, which means robbery could be a motive. Or, more likely, whoever killed her needed to remove something incriminating." Agatha stared at the young detective, a cold thrill washing over her exhaustion. A stolen phone, a forged financial trail, a murder disguised as a tragic village accident. "Thank you, Bill," Agatha said softly, a rare note of genuine warmth in her voice. "You're a good boy. Better than Wilkes deserves." Bill grinned sheepishly, standing up and brushing biscuit crumbs from his trousers. "Just remember, you didn't hear any of this from me, Agatha. If Wilkes finds out I leaked case details to you, he'll transfer me to traffic duty in the middle of a sheep crossing. Your secret is safe with me," Agatha promised. As the door clicked shut behind Bill, Agatha walked over to the window, staring out into the pitch black Cotswold's night. Fiona Sterling had secrets, and someone had killed her to keep them buried. But Agatha Raisin had something much more dangerous on her side: wounded pride, a relentless curiosity, and a very sharp axe to grind. Tomorrow, she decided, she was going to find out who really owned that missing phone. Chapter 5. A broken china cup and a midnight visitor the next morning. Carsley was blanketed in a heavy melancholic mist that clung to the thatch, roofed cottages like a damp shroud. Agatha woke with a distinct sense of purpose. Her bruised ego had fully transformed into tactical adrenaline. If the police were too blind to look past the obvious alibis, she would simply have to do the legwork herself. Her first task, however, was caffeine. Agatha padded downstairs in her silk dressing gown, her bare feet padding softly against the hardwood floors. She filled her electric kettle, tapped her fingernails impatiently against the counter, and reached into the cupboard for her favorite hand-painted bone china mug, the one with the delicate blue cornflowers that Charles had given her for her birthday 2 years ago. As she pulled it out, her thumb brushed the rim, and a sharp, stinging pain made her hiss. She pulled her hand back, blinking in confusion. A tiny droplet of blood welled up on her thumb. She peered closely at the mug. A hairline crack jagged down its side, splitting the cornflower motif right through the center. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Agatha muttered, sucking on her thumb. "Did the cleaning woman drop this?" She set the ruined mug down on the counter. With a heavy thud, a strange, prickling sensation of unease washing over her. It wasn't just the loss of the cup, it was the timing. Superstitions were utter nonsense, of course. She was a modern, sophisticated woman who had lived in London for decades. But her grandmother used to say that breaking a cherished cup on the morning of a dangerous undertaking was a bad omen. Shaking off the momentary chill, Agatha dressed with meticulous care. She opted for a sensible yet stylish charcoal, grey tweed skirt, a cream cashmere turtleneck, and sturdier leather boots that could handle the muddy Cotswold's lanes. She needed to pay a visit to Mrs. Bloxby. The vicar's wife was the unofficial archive of Carsley. If anyone knew about Fiona Sterling's financial desperation, local loans, or secret liaisons, it would be the woman who listened to everyone's confessions over weak tea and Victoria sponge. 15 minutes later, Agatha was walking briskly up the gravel path toward the vicarage. The autumn air smelled of wood smoke and damp earth. She was halfway to the front door when a shadow detached itself from the side of the rectory. "Agatha, wait." Agatha spun around, her hand flying to her throat. Emerging from the shelter of an ivy-covered stone wall was Emily Harrison. The young woman looked even worse than she had at the pub the day before. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her jacket was zipped crookedly, and she was wringing her hands so hard Her knuckles were stark white. "Emily." Agatha stared, lowering her hand. "What on earth are you doing, lurking behind the vicarage bushes at 9 inches the morning?" Emily glanced around frantically, as if expecting Inspector Wilkes to leap out from the rhododendrons. "I needed to talk to someone. I saw you walking this way. You were asking questions yesterday. About Fiona." "I was asking obvious questions that the police are too lazy to pursue," Agatha corrected gently, sensing the girl's high state of anxiety. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Are you all right, child? You look like you haven't slept a wink." "I haven't," Emily whispered, a choked sound escaping her throat. A tear spilled over her eyelashes, cutting a clean path through her pale cheek. "I didn't kill her, Mrs. Raisin. You have to believe me. Everyone in the village is looking at me sideways because of Julian, but I swear I didn't touch her." Agatha studied the girl closely. There was no artifice here, no defensive PR spin, just raw, unadulterated terror. "Nobody thinks you're a murderer, Emily, least of all me," Agatha said, adopting a softer, more maternal tone than she usually managed. "Though you were remarkably defensive of Julian Vance yesterday. Is that what's upsetting you? Do you think he had something to do with it?" Emily flinched, pulling her coat tighter around herself. "Julian is complicated. He's ambitious. When he came to Carsley to renovate the old mill, he needed investors. He needed capital. And Fiona had money." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "Bill Wong told me. She was broke." "She was broke," Emily corrected bitterly, her voice dropping to a trembling whisper. "But she lied to Julian. She made him believe she had a huge property settlement coming from her divorce, enough to fund the entire second phase of the mill renovation. Julian fell for it hook, line, and sinker. They were talking about a partnership, maybe even, well, they were spending a lot of time together." Agatha felt a mental click, like a tumbler's falling into place in a lock. So Julian invested his hopes, and perhaps his own remaining cash, into Fiona's non-existent fortune. And yesterday at the festival, did he find out the truth? Emily nodded miserably. "I heard them arguing behind the produce tent around 2 o'clock. Just before she was killed. Julian was furious. He said she had ruined him, that she was a fraud. I walked away because I couldn't bear to listen, but he—" Emily covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. "If anyone finds out about the argument, they'll think he did it. And did he?" Agatha asked quietly. Emily dropped her hands, her eyes wide and pleading. "I don't know, Mrs. Raisin. That's what's terrifying me. I love him, or at least I thought I did. But yesterday, after she was found, Julian didn't look shocked. He looked relieved." Agatha stood in silence, the damp morning wind rustling the yellow leaves above them. A broke architect, a fraudulent social climber, a public argument, and a missing phone. The puzzle pieces were falling together with terrifying clarity. "Thank you, Emily," Agatha said firmly, patting the girl's trembling shoulder. "Go home, make yourself a strong cup of tea, and don't speak to anyone about this, especially not Inspector Wilkes." As Emily scurried down the path, Agatha turned toward the vicarage door, her mind racing. Julian Vance had a massive motive, a violent temper when pushed, and a complete lack of an alibi for the crucial 20-minute window. It was time to pay the handsome architect a little visit at the old mill, and Agatha Raisin had never been one to shy away from walking straight into the lion's den. Chapter 6. Sawdust, Secrets, and a Defiant Architect. The old Carsley mill sat at the edge of the village, a hulking structure of weathered Cotswold stone and rotting timber that smelled of stagnant river water and damp history. Once a thriving hub of local grain production, it was now a chaotic construction site echoing with the hollow ghosts of ambition. Agatha pushed open the heavy wooden swing door, her sensible leather boots crunching loudly over a floor carpeted in thick sawdust and wood shavings. The interior was cavernous, shafts of pale autumn light cutting through the dusty air like searchlights. Scaffolding framed the crumbling limestone walls, and power tools sat idle on makeshift tables. "Hello," Agatha called out, her voice sharp and ringing. "Is anyone here?" Department of Redundant Inquiries. From the upper level, near a gaping window overlooking the rushing Wear, a heavy sigh echoed down. Heavy boots clattered against wooden stairs, and Julian Vance appeared, descending into the dim light. He had traded his barber jacket for a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up to the elbows, exposing forearms dusted with sawdust and corded with lean muscle. He didn't look welcoming. His jaw was clenched, and his dark eyes narrowed the moment he recognized the fuchsia wool coat, which Agatha had swapped for her charcoal jacket earlier, though her presence was just as unmistakable. "Mrs. Raisin," Julian said, his voice clipped and cold. "This is an active construction site. It's private property, and frankly, it's dangerous. You shouldn't be here." "Oh, nonsense, Julian. I've survived London PR agencies and 3 disastrous marriages. A few stray planks of timber aren't going to terrify me," Agatha retorted, stepping further into the mill and eyeing the exposed beams. "Besides, I wanted to see how the renovation is coming along. Or should I say, how the funding is coming along." Julian stopped a few feet away from her, his expression hardening into a mask of polite hostility. "My financial arrangements are none of your concern. If you're looking for gossip to take back to your little village knitting circle, I suggest you look elsewhere." "It's not gossip if it's murder, Julian," Agatha said softly, taking a deliberate step closer. She locked her eyes onto his, refusing to back down. "Emily Harrison was very upset this morning. She told me about your little chat with Fiona Sterling behind the produce tent yesterday afternoon, right around the time someone wrapped a decorative bunch of wheat around Fiona's neck." Julian's breath hitched for a fraction of a second. A muscle twitched sharply in his jaw, but he recovered quickly, pasting on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Emily has a very overactive imagination. Grief does strange things to people." "Grief, yes. Fear, absolutely," Agatha countered, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the sharp edge of absolute conviction. "She heard you and Fiona arguing. She heard you say Fiona had ruined you, that Fiona was a fraud who lied about her property settlement." The silence in the cavernous mill grew heavy, broken only by the distant, rhythmic rush of the river outside. Julian stared at her, the mask of easy charm completely slipping away, revealing the desperate, stressed man beneath. "She was a fraud," Julian muttered through gritted teeth, stepping forward until he loomed over her. For a moment, Agatha felt a brief, fluttering pulse of caution. He was younger, taller, and physically imposing. "Do you have any idea what it takes to launch a project like this? I sunk every penny I had into this mill. I trusted her. I believed her when she said her divorce settlement would clear next month. When I found out yesterday morning that she was completely broke, that she had been lying to everyone just to play the grand dame of Carsley, everything I built was hanging by a thread." "So you killed her?" Agatha asked, her voice steady, though her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "No," Julian snapped, his voice echoing off the stone walls. He rubbed a hand over his face, looking suddenly exhausted. "I was furious, yes. I went looking for her at the fete to demand an explanation. We argued behind the produce tent, but I didn't kill her. When I walked away, she was entirely, frustratingly alive." "And where did you go after you walked away?" Agatha pressed. "Where is your alibi for the 20-minute window when she was strangled?" Julian hesitated, his eyes darting away toward the river window. "I went back to my truck. I needed to clear my head. I sat there smoking a cigarette. Alone. Yes, alone," Julian admitted bitterly, "which means I have no witness. But that doesn't make me a murderer, Mrs. Raisin." Agatha studied him intently. He looked desperate, cornered, and deeply foolish for having trusted a social climber like Fiona. But did he look like a cold-blooded killer who would fashion a weapon out of harvest decorations? Before Agatha could press further, the sharp ring of a mobile phone shattered the tension. Julian pulled a sleek smartphone from his flannel pocket, glanced at the screen, and frowned. "What?" he muttered, answering it. "Hello. Yes, this is Julian Vance." Agatha watched his face drain of all color. The haughty defiance vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. Are you sure?" Julian whispered, his hand trembling slightly. "Carsley Lane. God. All right, I'm coming." He lowered the phone slowly, staring blankly at the sawdust floor. "What is it?" Agatha demanded, a cold dread pooling in her stomach. Julian, what happened? Julian looked up, his eyes wide with shock. That was Inspector Wilkes. Another body has just been found. Chapter 7. A second tragedy on Carsley Lane. The Cotswolds mist had barely burned off when Agatha and Julian arrived at Carsley Lane, navigating past flashing blue police lights that cast an eerie strobe. Like neon glow over the hedgerows, a cordon of yellow police tape blocked off a narrow dirt turnoff, where sheep usually grazed in undisturbed rural peace. Inspector Wilkes was standing by his unmarked car, looking like a man who had swallowed a live hedgehog. When he spotted Agatha stepping out of her car, closely trailing Julian Vance, his face mottled into a dangerous shade of crimson. "You," Wilkes roared, pointing a thick finger straight at Agatha's nose. "How do you manage to materialize at every damn crime scene before the tea even goes cold? I swear, Mrs. Raisin, if you've been tampering with another body—" "I was merely having a civil architectural discussion with Mr. Vance, Inspector, when your little phone call interrupted us," Agatha retorted, lifting her chin and smoothing down her charcoal tweed skirt with supreme, unshakable dignity. "We came straight here as concerned citizens." "Who is it? What happened?" Wilkes looked as though he wanted to physically pick Agatha up and toss her into the nearest bramble bush, but he bit back his retort and turned his fury toward Julian instead. "Mr. Vance, your vehicle was spotted parked near this junction yesterday afternoon, and now we have a dead body less than 50 yards away. I think you and I need to have a very long, very uncomfortable chat back at the station. My truck was parked there because I had a flat tire last week, Inspector," Julian said, his voice tight with rising panic. "It's been sitting there since Thursday. That doesn't mean save it for the interview room," Wilkes barked, motioning 2 uniformed officers forward. "Bring him in, wait," Agatha cried, stepping forward. "Who is the victim, Wilkes? You can't just drag him away without telling us who we're looking at." Wilkes hesitated, casting a venomous glare at her before dropping his voice. "It's Emily Harrison." Agatha felt the breath leave her lungs in a sharp, cold rush. Emily, the terrified, trembling young woman who had stood by the vicarage wall only hours earlier, pouring her heart out about Julian, guilt and fear. "No," Agatha whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's impossible. I spoke to her this morning." "Well, you won't be speaking to her again," Wilkes said grimly. "She was found in the ditch by a local farmer half an hour ago. Cause of death appears to be blunt force trauma to the head, likely from a heavy object. And before you start playing amateur sleuth, Mrs. Raisin, let me remind you that this is now a double homicide. The stakes are a hell of a lot higher than a ruined village fete." Agatha watched, frozen, as the officers gently but firmly escorted Julian away toward the police cruiser. Julian didn't fight them. He looked stunned, his gaze fixed on the ground, his face completely bloodless. As the police cars tore away down the lane, kicking up gravel and exhaust, Agatha stood alone by the yellow tape. Her mind raced with a terrifying clarity. Emily had known something. She had heard Julian and Fiona arguing behind the produce tent. Yes, but had she seen something else? Had she witnessed the actual murder, or perhaps spotted who took Fiona's missing phone? That was why she had been lingering by the vicarage, trembling with fear. She had been too terrified to go to the police, so she had tried to confide in Agatha, and because she shared that secret, someone had silenced her permanently. "Oh, you fool, Agatha," she muttered to herself, a cold wave of guilt washing over her spine. If she had taken Emily straight to the police station instead of packing her off with a cup of tea and a pat on the shoulder, the girl might still be alive. "Looking a bit grim, aren't we, Aggie?" Agatha jumped, spinning around to find Charles Fraith leaning casually against a stone wall behind her, chewing on a stalk of grass. He looked entirely too relaxed for a man standing 50 feet from a fresh murder scene. "Don't call me Aggie," Agatha snapped, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. "And this isn't a spectator sport, Charles. Emily Harrison is dead." Charles's lazy smile faltered, replaced by a rare flicker of genuine seriousness. He dropped the grass stalk. "Heard about that in the village. Nasty business. The locals are locking their doors. They think a maniac is loose in Carsley." "It's not a maniac," Agatha said, her eyes narrowing as she looked down the empty lane where Emily had been found. "It's someone right here in the village. someone who realized Emily knew too much. She turned abruptly toward her car, a fierce, burning resolve settling deep into her bones. Wilkes thought he had his man in Julian Vance. Wilkes was an incompetent fool who would gladly railroad an innocent, or at least non-murderous, architect just to close the books. Julian was arrogant, hot-tempered, and financially desperate. But Agatha didn't believe he killed Fiona, and she was certain he didn't bludgeon sweet, terrified Emily Harrison to death. The real killer was still walking free in Carsley, hiding behind polite country smiles and village gossip, and Agatha Raisin was going to flush them out, no matter what it took. Chapter 8. Tea, tortoiseshell glasses, and a fatal slip of the tongue. The village of Carsley felt entirely changed by Monday afternoon. The usual cheerful hum of mowing lawns and gossiping neighbours had been replaced by a heavy, palpable paranoia. Curtains twitched nervously across every lane, front doors remained double-locked, and the local post office was practically vibrating with frantic, hushed theories about a bloodthirsty serial killer operating right under their noses. Agatha Carsley, however, was past paranoia. She was operating on pure, unadulterated fury and a stubborn refusal to let Inspector Wilkes bungle an investigation that had now cost a young girl her life. She sat in the quiet, orderly living room of Mrs. Bloxby's vicarage. The vicar's wife poured a cup of Earl Grey from a heavy ceramic pot, her face etched with deep, sorrowful lines. "It's just too dreadful, Agatha," Bloxby murmured, handing the delicate teacup across the low wooden table. "Poor Emily. She was such a gentle soul to think someone could do that. In broad daylight, right here in our peaceful village." "It wasn't a random maniac, Margaret," Agatha said firmly, staring down at the dark amber liquid in her cup. "It was someone she knew, someone she talked to. Emily was terrified yesterday morning. She told me she had heard Julian and Fiona arguing behind the produce tent. But looking back, I'm convinced she saw something else, too. Something she didn't dare say out loud." Mrs. Bloxby nodded slowly, resting her hands neatly in her lap. "Fear makes people keep dangerous secrets. Did she mention anyone else being near the tent at that time?" "No," Agatha sighed, rubbing her temples. "She was too focused on Julian. But think about it logically. Fiona's phone and handbag vanished from the scene of the first murder. Why? Because there was something incriminating on them. Texts, photos, call logs. Emily must have seen who took them, or perhaps she caught the real killer, red-handed. And now Julian is sitting in a police cell," Mrs. Bloxby observed softly. "Inspector Wilkes seems quite convinced he solved the case." "Wilkes couldn't solve a jigsaw puzzle with 3 pieces missing," Agatha snorted, taking a sip of her tea. "Julian is a hot-headed idiot who made terrible financial choices. But murder requires a cold, calculated desperation. This killer didn't just snap, they covered their tracks. They hunted Emily down because she was a loose end." Agatha set her cup down on the saucer with a sharp clink, her mind racing back over every detail of the last 48 hours. She thought of the village green, the produce tent, the whispered gossip at the Red Lion, and the peculiar jittery reactions of her neighbours. "I need to talk to everyone again," Agatha declared, standing up so abruptly her chair scraped against the hardwood floor. "Not as a suspect hunter, but as a concerned neighbour just checking in." "Be careful, Agatha," Mrs. Bloxby warned, her gentle eyes full of genuine concern. "A cornered animal is dangerous, and whoever is responsible has already crossed a line from which there is no return. Don't worry about me, Margaret. I have my self-preservation instincts finely tuned." Agatha lied smoothly, though a small, cold shiver ran down her spine. Her first stop was the Carsley post office and general store. Brenda, the postmistress, was leaning over the counter talking in hushed, dramatic tones to Mrs. Wellington when Agatha pushed the door open, setting the brass bell chiming. The conversation stopped instantly. Both women turned to look at Agatha, as if she were carrying a plague-ridden rat. "Afternoon, Brenda." "Mrs. Wellington," Agatha said coolly, sauntering over to the counter, as though she hadn't just been the subject of intensive gossip. "I need a loaf of sourdough and a packet of biscuits. And before you ask, no, Wilkes hasn't charged Julian yet, despite his best efforts." "Well," It's clear as day, isn't it? Mrs. Wellington sniffed, adjusting her sensible cardigan. An outsider comes to the village, builds a flashy mill, and brings nothing but trouble and bloodshed. I always said that Julian Vance had wrong unwritten all over his tailored tweed. Julian didn't kill Fiona, and he certainly didn't kill Emily. Agatha shot back, her tone sharp enough to pare apples. He was a fool for trusting Fiona's fake wealth, but he isn't a butcher. Oh, and I suppose you know who did it, Mrs. Raisin. Brenda chimed in, leaning across the counter with a narrowed, suspicious gaze. You seem awfully invested in defending men who treat women like dirt, always poking your nose where it doesn't belong, just like you did when you lived in London. Agatha felt a familiar, hot prick of irritation. She opened her mouth to deliver a blistering retort about Brenda's appalling hair dye. But something stopped her. Her eyes dropped to the counter, landing on Brenda's hands. The postmistress was nervously twisting a pair of tortoisey, shell reading glasses around her fingers. The plastic frame was cracked slightly at the bridge, held together with a tiny piece of clear tape. Agatha's breath caught in her throat. She remembered a detail from the preliminary gossip she had overheard at the police tape on Saturday. A small piece of tortoiseshell plastic had been found near the ditch where Emily Harrison's body was recovered. The police had assumed it belonged to Emily, but Emily hadn't worn glasses. Agatha slowly raised her eyes from Brenda's hands up to the postmistress's face. Brenda was suddenly sweating, her cheeks flushing a bright, unnatural crimson under the harsh fluorescent lights of the shop. Is something wrong with your glasses, Brenda? Agatha asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous icy whisper. Brenda snatched her hands away, dropping the spectacles into her apron pocket, as if they were burning hot. Nothing. Mind your own business, Agatha. Agatha didn't back down. The pieces clicked into a horrifying, brilliant pattern. Brenda's constant gossip, her intimate knowledge of everyone's financial standing, Fiona's mysterious debts, and the broken glasses at a murder scene. You didn't just gossip about Fiona's debts, did you, Brenda? Agatha said loudly, stepping closer to the counter. Fiona borrowed money from the post office savings fund, didn't she? Embezzlement. And you were going to go to prison if she didn't pay it back. But Fiona was broke. She couldn't pay a penny. Brenda went entirely white. Mrs. Wellington gasped, backing away from the counter in sheer horror. You killed Fiona to hide the theft. Agatha pressed relentlessly, her PR-owned instincts taking total control. And when Emily saw you near the produce tent, or saw you take Fiona's phone, you realized she was going to talk. So you tracked her down on Carsley Lane and silenced her. Lies, Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking as she grabbed a heavy tin of biscuits from the shelf behind her. You're insane, Agatha Raisin. Get out of my shop. Before Brenda could hurl the tin, Agatha lunged across the counter with surprising agility, pinning Brenda's wrists down against the wooden surface. The trap had been sprung, and the killer had finally taken the bait. Chapter 9. A trap sprung in the post office. Get off me, Brenda shrieked, thrashing wildly against the counter. Her face was contorted in a mask of panic and rage. The carefully maintained facade of the helpful village postmistress entirely shattered. Mrs. Wellington let out a terrified, strangled squawk and bolted for the front door, shouting for the police at the top of her lungs. Agatha didn't budge an inch. She clamped her grip onto Brenda's wrists with the fierce, unyielding tenacity of a terrier locking onto a rat. All her pent-up frustration, the humiliation of Fiona's quitch insults, the weight of Emily's tragic death, and the smug scowls of Inspector Wilkes converged into pure righteous fury. You embezzled village funds through the postal accounts to fund your pathetic little holidays to Torquay, didn't you, Brenda? Agatha accused, her voice ringing sharp and clear off the shelves of tinned beans and greeting cards. Fiona found out about it. She wasn't broke because of a failed divorce settlement. She was blackmailing you. She threatened to expose your little financial crimes to the post office auditors unless you kept her flush with cash. She was a parasite. Brenda screamed, suddenly stopping her thrashing. Her eyes bulged, dark and wild, confirming every syllable of Agatha's deduction. She sucked me dry. I gave her everything, my savings, the post office reserve, everything I had scraped together for 20 years. And still she wanted more. She laughed in my face on Saturday morning. She said she was going to tell the authorities before the day was over. The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Agatha's stomach turned over, but she held her ground. So you stole a decorative sheaf of wheat from the marquee, followed her into the dark produce tent, and snapped her neck. She deserved it, Brenda sobbed hysterically, her knees finally buckling. The fight drained out of her, leaving only a pathetic, shivering wreck of a woman. She was ruining my life. I just wanted her to be quiet. And Emily? Agatha asked, her voice dropping to a harsh, accusing whisper. What did Emily do, Brenda? Why did you kill her too? Brenda shuddered violently, tears streaming down her chalk-white face. I didn't mean to. I swear, I didn't mean to. I was terrified. When I took Fiona's phone from her pocket, so I could delete the text messages she sent me about the money, I dropped my glasses. Emily, sweet, little Emily was standing by the corner of the tent. She saw me. She saw the phone in my hand, and she saw the body. Agatha felt a cold spike of sorrow pierce her chest. Poor, observant Emily. She had simply been in the wrong place, at the wrong time. She promised she wouldn't say anything, Brenda whimpered, sagging further against the counter. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. But I knew she was terrified of me. I knew she'd break and go to the police. So, I followed her down Carsley Lane yesterday morning. I picked up a heavy wrench from the builder's skip. I just wanted to scare her into silence, but she screamed, and I hit her. Brenda collapsed completely, sliding down the wooden counter into a pathetic heap on the floor, weeping uncontrollably. The front door of the shop burst open with a crash, and heavy footsteps thudded across the linoleum floor. Freeze! Police. Detective Inspector Wilkes skidded into the shop, flanked by 2 uniformed constables and a wide-eyed Bill Wong. Wilkes took in the scene, Brenda sobbing on the floor, and Agatha standing over her with an air of absolute triumph, smoothing down her cashmere turtleneck. Wilkes opened his mouth, closed it, and stared at Agatha as if she were a particularly confusing apparition. Well, Inspector, Agatha said coolly, stepping back and offering a bright, utterly infuriating smile. What took you so long? I've wrapped your double murderer for you. Her tortoiseshell glasses are right there in her apron pocket, along with the victim's missing phone. Wilkes blinked, his face cycling through 3 distinct shades of purple before he finally managed to grunt. Cuff her. As the constables hauled a weeping Brenda to her feet and led her out into the waiting squad car, Bill Wong lingered behind for a brief second. He looked at Agatha with a mixture of sheer awe and absolute terror. Agatha, Bill whispered, shaking his head. You actually did it. You solved a double homicide while buying groceries. I came for sourdough and biscuits, Bill, Agatha corrected with a haughty toss of her head, though a warm glow of pride bloomed in her chest. The murder investigation was entirely incidental. Chapter 10, Gossip, and a glorious return to form by Tuesday afternoon. The dark cloud of suspicion and fear that had suffocated Carsley lifted as quickly as an autumn fog. The village green was once again quiet and orderly, save for a few stray patches of mud where police vehicles had torn up the turf. Brenda's full confession, detailing years of embezzlement, blackmail, and sheer desperation, was already the talk of every kitchen, garden gate, and pub corner within a 10-mile radius. Julian Vance had been released from police custody early that morning, looking pale and somewhat chastened, but entirely a free man. Inspector Wilkes had not offered a formal apology. Agatha hadn't expected one from a man whose pride was as fragile as a spun sugar swan. But Bill Wong had privately delivered a bottle of rather expensive French champagne to Agatha's front porch, with a note that simply read, "You were right. Again, please don't tell Wilkes." Agatha sat in her favorite plush armchair, a glowing fire crackling in the hearth. She wore her new fuchsia wool coat draped loosely over her shoulders, feeling an exquisite humming sense of vindication. Her boots had finally been cleaned of mud, her favorite hand-painted bone. China mug had been replaced by an even prettier antique, one Charles had sourced, and the world was, for the moment, spinning precisely as it should. A sharp, familiar knock rapped against her front door. Agatha didn't even bother getting up. "It's open," Charles, she called out, swirling the ice cubes in her large gin and tonic. The door swung open, and Charles Fraith strolled into the hallway, shedding his weather-beaten tweed jacket and tossing it onto the coat rack with casual disregard. He sauntered into the sitting room, looking impeccably pleased with himself. "Well, darling," Charles said, dropping onto the sofa and stretching his long legs out toward the fire. "The entire village is buzzing. They're calling you the Oracle of Carsley. Mrs. Wellington is currently organizing a petition to erect a bronze bust of you on the village green." "God forbid," Agatha shuddered, though a self-satisfied smile twitched at the corners of her lips. "A bronze bust would undoubtedly make my nose look too large. Besides, Mrs. Wellington only likes me today because she's relieved. She didn't buy her tinned beans from a cereal embezzler." "True," Charles laughed, reaching over to help himself to a crisp from the bowl on the coffee table. "Still, you've got to hand it to yourself, Aggie. 2 murders solved, a handsome architect saved from a wrongful imprisonment, and the post office accounting department finally audited. It's been quite the productive week." "Don't call me Aggie," Agatha snapped automatically, though there was no real heat behind it. She took a slow sip of her gin, letting the cool, crisp liquid settle her nerves. And it wasn't productive, it was exhausting. People in villages are far too complicated. Everyone has secrets, everyone is hiding behind polite smiles, and nobody appreciates a woman who speaks her mind. "Oh, they appreciate you," Charles corrected with a lazy grin. "They're just terrified of you, as well they should be." Agatha chuckled softly, leaning her head back against the cushion. For a brief moment, a familiar quiet ache rippled through her chest, the lingering shadow of loneliness that always seemed to creep in once the adrenaline faded, and the excitement of a solved mystery gave way to silence. She thought of her empty London flat, the ticking clock in the hallway, and the long, solitary evenings stretching ahead. She wasn't getting any younger. Her Italian leather boots were scuffed, her heart was far too easily entangled in romantic daydreams, and she was entirely stubbornly set in her ways. Yet, as she looked around her cozy, lamp-lit cottage, listening to the gentle crackle of the fire and the easy banter of her oldest friend, Agatha realized something comforting. She might be abrasive, nosy, and chronically impatient, but Carsley was her home now, and she wasn't going anywhere. "Well," Agatha said briskly, banishing the momentary melancholy with a sharp toss of her head. She set her glass down with a firm clink and fixed Charles with a piercing, commanding look. "Since you're here, and since you clearly have nothing better to do with your aristocratic free time, you can make yourself useful." Charles raised an eyebrow, instantly suspicious. "And what does that entail, my lethal flower?" "Drive me down to the local pub," Agatha declared, standing up and smoothing down her future coat with an air of absolute majesty. "I want a proper pint of cider, a hot meal, and most importantly, I want to watch the entire village trip over themselves to be polite to me." Charles threw his head back and laughed, a rich, genuine sound that chased away the last lingering shadows of the Cotswolds. "Tragedy, lead the way, Agatha. God help anyone who gets in your path." Chapter 11. Peace, pints, and pretentious puddings. The Red Lion had never looked quite so glorious. As Agatha pushed open the heavy oak door, flanked by Charles Fraith like a rather rumpled aristocratic bodyguard, a sudden, absolute hush fell over the crowded room. It wasn't the hostile, suspicious silence of a few days prior, when Brenda had been whispering behind the post office counter, or Inspector Wilkes had been glaring over his pint. This was the respectful, wide-eyed hush of a community collectively realizing that the eccentric woman in the bright fuchsia coat was, quite literally, the most dangerous and formidable force in the Cotswolds. Missy Wellington, sitting near the fireplace with a half-empty glass of sherry, immediately averted her gaze and became intensely interested in her tapestry bag. Old Miss Simpkins nodded rapidly from across the room, offering a tight, nervous smile that looked like a grimace. "Look at them," Charles murmured into Agatha's ear, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. "You could walk behind the bar right now, pour yourself the landlord's best scotch, and not a single soul would dare utter a peep of protest." "As they damn well should," Agatha whispered back, her chin tilted up with supreme, unshakable pride. She swept across the flagstone floor, with the theatrical grace of a West End actress, taking her final curtain call. She chose the best table in the house, the prime booth right by the front window where everyone could admire her outfit and contemplate her lethal investigative prowess. "Evening, Agatha, Mr. Fraith." The landlord greeted them promptly, appearing at their table with a speed that defied his usual sluggish demeanor. He nervously polished an already spotless beer glass with a tea towel. "What can I get you both this evening?" "Pint of cider, large gin." "A large gin and tonic for me, landlord," Agatha said crisply, settling back against the wooden bench and arranging her coat around her shoulders. "Plenty of ice, and make sure the lime is fresh. And Charles will have a pint of whatever bitter is least likely to give him a stomachache." "Right away, Mrs. Raisin," the landlord mumbled, practically tripping over his own clogs in his haste to retreat behind the bar. Charles slid into the opposite side of the booth, shaking his head with an amused grin. "You know, Aggie, you've really outdone yourself this time. You survived a murder investigation, exposed a corrupt postmistress, saved an innocent man from the clink, and secured free drinks for life. It's almost impressive." "It is impressive," Agatha corrected him sharply, though a pleased smirk tugged at the corners of her mouth. "And stop calling me Aggie." A moment later, the landlord returned with their drinks, setting them down with the careful reverence usually reserved for fine china. Agatha took a long, satisfying sip of her gin. The crisp, botanical bite hit the back of her throat, washing away the lingering tension of the past few days. As she glanced around the room, she noticed Julian Vance sitting near the back corner. The architect was nursing a pint of lager, looking considerably more relaxed than he had during his interrogation. When he caught Agatha's eye across the room, he raised his glass in a silent, respectful toast. Agatha offered a cool, dignified nod in return. She wasn't about to go swooning over him. He was still an overly ambitious man who had nearly fallen for a fraud, but she could accept a truce between survivors. "So," Charles said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the sticky wood of the table, "now that Carsley is safe for another 5 minutes, what's next on the agenda? Are you going to take up pottery, buy another impractical coat, or are you simply going to sit here and bask in the terrified adoration of the local wider?" Agatha narrowed her eyes at him, though her heart felt unexpectedly light. The loneliness that had threatened to creep in earlier that afternoon had completely evaporated, chased away by the warm hum of the pub, the fizz of her gin, and the undeniable thrill of a job exceptionally well done. "I am going to enjoy my drink, Charles," Agatha said smoothly, her eyes sparkling with renewed mischief. "And then, tomorrow morning, I am going to march right down to the village fete committee office and demand to know why my store, bought quiche, was unfairly disqualified from the baking competition last year." Charles threw his head back and laughed, the sound ringing out warmly over the chatter of the pub. "God help them," he wheezed. "May the Lord have mercy on the parish council, because Agatha Raisin certainly won't." Agatha smiled, taking another sip of her drink as the familiar comforting hum of village life resumed around her. She was older, she was stubborn, and her Italian leather boots had barely survived the week, but Agatha Raisin was right back where she belonged. Chapter 12. A new lease on life, and a spot of gardening. The morning sun broke over Carsley, like a splash of liquid gold, burning away the last lingering remnants of autumn mist and warming the frost-kissed cobblestones. It was a glorious, crisp Tuesday, the kind of Cotswold's morning that made you feel as though the world had been scrubbed clean and polished, especially for your convenience. Agatha Raisin stood at her kitchen sink, wearing a vibrant turquoise silk dressing gown that clashed magnificently with her yellow rubber cleaning gloves, vigorously scrubbing a frying pan that didn't really need it. Her mind was humming with a quiet, triumphant satisfaction. The village had returned to its normal, predictable rhythm. The post office was temporarily under the management of a dreary relief worker from Oxford, while the auditors sifted through Brenda's creative accounting records, and Inspector Wilkes had officially retreated into his office, maintaining a sullen, silent distance from the Carsley queen of amateur detection. A cheerful rap at her front door interrupted her morning chores. Agatha peeled off her rubber gloves, smoothed her hair back with an automatic gesture of vanity, and marched down the hallway. She swung the door open, fully expecting Charles looking for a morning hangover cure, or Mrs. Bloxby with a basket of fresh parish apples. Instead, Standing on her doorstep was a young woman with neat brown hair, wearing a sensible trench coat and holding a large, neatly wrapped parcel tied with a purple ribbon. Agatha blinked, her eyes narrowing slightly in surprise. "Can I help you?" The young woman offered a shy, polite smile. "Mrs. Raisin, I'm Sarah, Emily Harrison's younger sister." Agatha's breath hitched for a fraction of a second, the bustling triumph of the previous evening instantly sobering into a deep, tender empathy. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Oh, Sarah, come in, child. Please, come in." Sarah stepped into the hallway, her fingers tightly clutching the ribbon of the parcel. She looked around Agatha's cozy, impeccably decorated cottage with hesitant curiosity before turning her large, mournful brown eyes back to Agatha. "I wanted to come by yesterday," Sarah began, her voice trembling slightly. "But it was all so overwhelming. The police, the reporters. It's been a nightmare, but before everything happened, Emily talked about you a lot." Agatha swallowed the sudden lump in her throat, motioning Sarah toward the sitting room. "She was a sweet girl, Sarah, far too gentle for this mad world. I only wish I could have protected her." "You did protect her memory," Sarah said softly, following Agatha into the room and sitting down on the edge of the sofa. "The police told me everything," they said. "If you hadn't put the pieces together, Brenda might have gotten away with it, and my sister would have been just another unsolved tragedy." Sarah reached out and placed the parcel on the coffee table. "Emily was clearing out some things from her room last week, and she found this. She bought it at the village charity shop a month ago, and she kept saying she wanted to give it to you as a peace offering after that silly argument you had at the fete over the raffle tickets." Agatha looked down at the parcel, a genuine, unforced warmth blooming in her chest. She carefully untied the purple ribbon and folded back the brown paper. Inside sat a charming, vintage china tea set, a milk jug and sugar bowl, painted with delicate, hand-drawn lavender sprigs. It was utterly quaint, completely unpretentious, and devastatingly thoughtful. A stray tear pricked at the corner of Agatha's eyes, though she blinked it away fiercely, unwilling to let her mascara run. It's lovely," Agatha murmured, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "Thank you, Sarah, truly." They sat together in quiet companionship for nearly half an hour, sharing memories of Emily, talking about the quiet resilience of small villages, and letting the grief slowly settle into something manageable. When Sarah finally stood up to leave, Agatha walked her all the way to the garden gate, offering a firm, comforting embrace that surprised them both. As Sarah's car disappeared down the lane, Agatha walked back up her gravel path, her fingers tracing the edge of the lavender tea, set cradled in her arms. She looked out over her small, beautifully manicured front garden. The autumn flowers were fading, ready for the long winter sleep, but beneath the damp earth, new bulbs were waiting for spring. Agatha walked inside, placed the tea set safely on her sideboard where it would catch the morning light, and pulled off her turquoise dressing gown. It was time to get dressed. There were bulbs to plant, committee members to terrorize, and a whole village to keep an eye on. She was Agatha Raisin, after all, and life in Carsley was never dull for long.